Now let's quickly look at some of the present parallels between the United States and Nazi Germany. First of all, we need to understand the political spectrum. On the far right of the political spectrum is anarchists, okay? They believe in abolishing all government, running wild and woolly in the streets. Okay, libertarianism is somewhere over on the right, and they believe that you limit almost most of the powers of the government, and they do have some good ideas. In the middle, where we were originally founded as a country, we were founded as a constitutional republic, right in the middle of the political spectrum, okay? Washington, Jefferson, and most political conservatives today who still believe in the Constitution and our traditional values would be in the middle of the political spectrum. On the far left, of course, is communism. But also on the far left is National Socialism, which is Nazism, okay? They've tried to redefine it as being right-wing, but that's not true. Nazism is socialism, and it's on the far left, as is fascism, as is socialism, as is liberalism, as is secular humanism, okay? Now, the liberals have come along to confuse the issue, and they've said, no, because communism is on the far left, the people who oppose communism are on the far right, and so they put the Nazis over on the far right, but they weren't. The Nazis were far left. Study Mein Kampf, which was the writings of Adolf Hitler, and compare it with Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto. Very, very similar. Okay? And then they say, but if the Nazis are over on the far right, then so are the conservatives, and so they have relabeled us as right-wing extremists, etc., etc. And that's a favorite tactic of the political left, is to take their opposition and to label them with horrible, nasty names. People who are patriots today are being called right-wing fanatics. They're being called religious fanatics, dangerous religious cultists, white supremacists, Nazis, etc., etc. And this is setting the stage for a government attack against conservatives, against traditionalists, against people who believe in the Constitution, against strong Christians, etc., etc. They've already begun to declare that strong Christians who believe in homeschooling, who believe in disciplining their children, who study the Bible, who believe in the second coming of Christ and in Bible prophecy and so forth, the establishment press in the last 60 days has already begun to describe us as dangerous religious cultists. And we know what we do with dangerous religious cultists, don't we? We burn them. Okay? Look at Waco. Okay, there's some common denominators behind the Nazis, the fascists, and the communists. The common denominators are they're an all-powerful totalitarian dictatorial governments which control all aspects of their subjects' lives. These three governments, three forms of government, promulgate massive numbers of rules, regulations, and laws enforced by an all-powerful bureaucracy and a preoccupation with death. They have a tremendous preoccupation with death. Okay, all three, Nazism, fascism, and communism, are based on man's reason and a rejection of God, His authority, and His law. Socialism, which America is presently plunging into, is simply communism or Nazism minus the dictatorship, or gulag, as in Sweden in recent decades. Socialism is simply a small step away from communism or Nazism. As the head of the Labour Socialist Party in England said some yeyears ago, his name was John Strachey, he said, it's impossible to move directly from communism to capitalism. You've got to use socialism as a stepping stone or an interim step, so all communists should work for socialism. Lenin, Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, Gorbachev, Castro, Daniel Ortega, all of these are primarily, first and foremost, socialists, and so are Bill and Hillary Clinton. Okay? Most people condemn Nazism because of its overt, gross manifestations: the Holocaust, the extermination of millions of Jews and others, the death and destruction of World War II, instead of because of Nazism's essence. Nazism was much more than killing Jews and starting wars. It was rejection of God, His authority, and of His law. Now, there's some interesting present parallels between the U.S. and the Nazi Third Reich. In Nazi Germany, there was a tremendous preoccupation with death. Abortion became very commonplace in Germany in the late 20s and 30s, and per capita they were doing more of it than we are in this country, although 40% of all pregnancies in America are now ended by killing the baby. okay, in America today. From abortion, the Germans went on to euthanasia, and from euthanasia, then they went on to emptying out the homes that had the infirm, the old, the aged, the crippled, people who were blind, and they began to kill them. And really, before they ever got to the place where they were killing Jews in concentration camps and so forth, and before they launched World War II, they had emptied out these homes and killed around 274,000. Okay? Now, so there was a tremendous preoccupation with death in Nazi Germany. And of course, we see the explosion in abortion in this country. We're moving towards euthanasia. The average American, you know, didn't even blink when the government killed those 100 or so people down in Waco. Didn't even blink. Well, we see 20,000 murders from the time a kid is probably 3 years old until he's grown on television. And so we're inoculated to violence. We don't even think a thing about it. And it's amazing, as I've been on dozens of talk shows since Operation Waco, since the government torched that place, and the average American, the average Christian says, well, those guys were radical cultists and they had guns, they deserved what they got. Okay? We're beginning to move towards the same mental, psychological preoccupation with death in this country that they had, and that led to the extermination of a lot of Christians and a lot of people before it was all over in Germany. There were thousands of laws, rules, and regulations passed in Germany that basically made everybody in Germany a criminal. You couldn't keep track of all of them. You couldn't keep up with them, so they could nail anybody they wanted to nail at any time for these various laws, rules, and regulations. They began to nail Christians for sending money out of the country to missionaries under the new monetary, economic laws, etc., etc. We're seeing exactly the same thing in America with tens of thousands of new rules, laws, and regulations that make all of us criminals, and I'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. Okay, there was an occultic dimension, very much an occultic dimension to the Third Reich. People think it was primarily political. It was primarily supernatural. These people were Satan worshipers. They got involved in some Eastern religions that were the same religions that were the basis of the New Age movement, and so the Third Reich was primarily occultic. Okay, and when you see the rise of the occult, you will always see it turn against fundamental Christians and against Orthodox Jews, and it did in Germany, and you'll see the same thing happen here in the United States in the very, very near future. But you need to understand that this whole move towards the New World Order and the New Age, which are opposite sides of the same coin, is primarily occultic, and there's a supernatural, satanic dynamic behind it. The people who are the leading lights in the New World Order in this country are also worshipers of Lucifer, son of the morning star. Okay? So another similarity between us and Nazi Germany then was the occultic dimension of the Third Reich. They had a tremendous preoccupation with animal rights. The same Nazis that could kill Jews, that could kill anybody, crippled children, Christians, you name it, those same Nazis would become emotional and would weep over the death of an animal, a wild animal, a farm animal. They finally curtailed hunting. They stopped the killing of farm animals. The top Nazis all became vegetarians. They would weep over the boiling of a frog or a lobster, and these were the same people who didn't even give a second thought to the killing of people, to the killing of babies and the old people and euthanasia, etc., etc. And you say, well, what an incredible inconsistency that you would love and weep over animals and not think anything about the death of people. We have the same inconsistency in the United States today. The same people who will weep over the spotted owl or a whale or a snail darter or a wolf or whatever, who are freaks on animal rights, who are the environmentalists, who are the earth firsters in this country. These are the same people who are the leaders in killing babies and moving to euthanasia, etc., etc. And it's hard to understand that what appears to be a gross inconsistency if you don't understand the occultic nature of our environmental movement in this country today and the occultic nature of this whole animal rights movement in Nazi Germany a few years ago. They ignored their constitution. They had a very fine constitution in that country. They totally ignored it. In fact, Hitler just would write notes to the doctors. He wrote a little note on a scrap of paper to the leading doctor and said, okay, now we're going to start killing the old people. We're going to start euthanasia on the old people. And they started doing things that were totally extra-constitutional. They ran roughshod over the Constitution. That's exactly what our government is doing. They pretend like the Constitution's not there. just exactly how was the Constitution followed when the BATF attacked those folks down in Waco on the 27th of February with 100 people? How do you serve due process and serve a search warrant, as our Constitution says you're supposed to do, when you attack a place with 100 people in helicopter gunships and throwing stun grenades in and go through the windows with your guns blazing, etc., etc.? When Slick Willie wrote his 5 executive orders on the 3rd day he was in office, how did this fit in with the Constitution or any of the other thousands of executive orders? So you see, we're ignoring our Constitution just like they were. Rejected their heritage. They had a fine heritage. They had a Christian heritage. Remember Martin Luther, who was head of the Christian Reformation, came from Germany, and yet they totally ran roughshod over their heritage and forgot it. They wiped out their history, just like George Orwell in 1984 said Big Brother would do, erase the old history and create a new history, a socialist history, and that's exactly what's happening in our country today as we reject our heritage. Hitler used homosexuals, drug addicts, and criminals to destabilize the country and advance the Nazi political machine. Now, he used them for about a year. He organized these folks into something called the Brown Shirts, but they were creating so much havoc that finally the military and the SS, the Gestapo, came to him on June 30th of 1934, and they said, you get rid of these idiots, these scum that are helping to destabilize this country, or we will withdraw our support. And so on June 30th of 1934, they had what was called the Night of the Long Knives, and they began to kill thousands of these homosexuals and these drug addicts and these gangsters and so forth, and they eventually wiped most of them out. Watch Bill and Hillary and how they are using homosexuals today. And it is also beginning to be rumored that the government may be organizing gangs in Los Angeles and elsewhere to be kind of the shock troops as they move this whole New World Order thing along. And so that'll be interesting to see if our government does something similar. But at least the Clintonistas are now using the homosexuals much in the way that Hitler did when he first came to power. So there's some very, very interesting parallels today for people who will look at what was happening in Nazi Germany in the early 1930s. And I want to remind you that when the Nazis came to power, they were voted into power, and within 12 months they had established a total dictatorship. The people supported most of this. The mentality of the people had been prepared in the 20s and early 30s for the Nazi takeover, just as I think the mentality of the American people in the 70s and 80s and in the early 90s is being prepared for something very, very similar in the United States today. Let's talk about the Fourth Reich toward an American police state. America, as I said, is beginning to look more and more like Nazi Germany of the early 30s or the Soviet Union from the 20s through the 80s. True criminals, murderers, rapists, burglars, robbers, etc., are giving light or negligible jail sentences, while the government is now reclassifying honest, law-abiding Americans as criminals and giving them severe jail sentences or confiscating their assets or property via draconian Nazi Marxist-Leninist style seizure laws. The legal system and government now allows the have-nots to plunder the haves or the assets of the haves in America. And a gargantuan U.S. government passes tens of thousands of new regulations each year, 67,700 pages of fine print in 1992 to control every aspect of Americans' lives. As the U.S. is moving towards a socialist America and towards the New World Order, the strategy of Antonio Gramsci, founder of the Italian Communist Party, is being utilized. Gramsci believed the communists could not seize the political power until they first seized cultural power. Okay? So Gramsci said that the social revolution would be brought about by the transformation of a society's culture and values, not through political or military power. The establishment of radical socialism in a targeted country, his was Italy, now it's America, would come via the undermining and transformation of traditional Western values. Is that happening in America today? You watch television, you see the garbage on television and in the movies, you listen to the rock music, you see the abortion, you see the pornography our country is kicking out. The strategy of the socialists then is to change the way society thinks about problems to gain control over the minds of the population. Gramsci strategized the convergence of religion and socialism, with religion stripped of all spiritual content, and a takeover of the entire field where culture is manifest. That is, in the schools, the universities, the media, the Hollywood, etc., etc. And that, of course, has happened. Following Gramsci's strategy, the socialists of our day in America, Europe, South Africa, and throughout the West have developed a superstructure reflecting a socialist culture, replete with socialist literature, films, plays, poetry, and various forms of art and music. And if your kids are in the public schools anywhere in America today, they're being brainwashed with same. Or if you watch television, you are being brainwashed with same. It should be remembered that Bill Clinton has studied under and highly praised Italian socialists and communists, and the people they have brought in with them fit very well into this Gramsci strategy.